Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our program, the fourth annual Fordham Reads Dante Lecture. My name is Angela Alimo O'Donnell, as my little square tells you. I'm the Associate Director of the Kern Center for American Catholic Studies, and it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, distinguished fiction writer Randy Boyagoda. Many of us in the Zoom room know about the Fordham Reads Dante project, but for those who may not, let me say a few words about this extraordinary initiative. The brainchild of Fordham's resident Dante scholar, Professor Susanna Barcella, who is one of my co-hosts this evening for this meeting, and also co-sponsored by Modern Languages, Medieval Studies, and the Kern Center. Fordham Reads Dante gathers each month of the academic year to listen to the poetry of Dante read by a native Italian speaker, to hear a brief introduction to the canto being read that day, and to engage in discussion. The conversation is proceeding at the luxuriously leisurely pace of one canto per meeting, enabling the group to consider carefully the artistry of the commedia, to savor the music of Dante's language and lines, and to better understand not only what the poem means, but how the poem means, to quote from Gianciardi. Given this leisurely pace, and given the fact that the commedia consists of 100 cantos, we will be at this for a while, 16.6 years to be exact. However, Dante was undaunted in his project of writing 4,233 lines of terza rima, so we shall follow the master's lead and be undaunted in our project of reading them. As you can likely tell from this description of the initiative, our focus has been on hearing Dante. To recreate orally the original sound of the poem, for poetry is music first and foremost. In addition, we are interested in the ways in which Dante's work continues to be a persistent presence in the intellectual, religious, and artistic imagination in the Western world. Dante has influenced so many artists, from painters to poets to musicians to composers, beginning in his own era and continuing into our present moment. This brings us to our annual Dante Lecture, an event held in the early fall, which traditionally kicks off our new year of Fordham Reads Dante gatherings. This year's speaker brings us a fresh, new way of seeing Dante's 700-year-old poem and how it intersects with modern life. Canadian novelist Randy Boyagoda has been working on a trilogy of novels engaging the three movements of Dante's great poem, Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. In 2018, he published the first of the three books, Original Prynne, which was met with rave reviews, many of which praise Boyagoda's humor, as well as his ambition in taking on grand subjects that are relevant in our own time, as well as in eternity. Quote, Original Prynne is an entertaining and essential novel about family life, faith, temptation, and fanaticism. It's a timely story about timeless truths, told with wise insight and great humor, confirming Randy Boyagoda's place as one of the best satirical writers of today. Now, in September of 2021, Boyagoda has released the second book of the trilogy, the Purgatorio movement, titled Dante's Indiana. According to novelist John Irving, Dante's Indiana is, quote, a divine comedy for our times. Another reviewer writes, Randy Boyagoda's Dante's Indiana is many things, knee-slapping satire, social commentary, spiritual pilgrimage, but above all, it is an attempt to bring contrapasso to bear on contemporary American life, both implicitly and explicitly. By locating the sacred within the profane, Dante's Indiana offers a counter-narrative to that of the culture wars. Today, we have the rare privilege of hearing Randy Boyagoda read from his new novel and talk about his unique project of bringing Dante to bear on contemporary American life. After his presentation, Dr. Susanna Barcella, Dr. Boyagoda, and myself will engage in some conversation about the project, and we welcome your questions and comments. Please feel free to type them into the chat as the presentation proceeds, and we will pay attention to that and try to get to your questions and comments. Ordinarily, if this were an in-person event, we would have books for sale. However, instead of that, we are going to put a link in the chat so that you can purchase the book online and have it brought to your house, or instantly download the ebook to your Kindle or your iPad. And if you use the code, very easy to remember, Boyagoda21, you can get 20% off of both Dante's Indiana and Original Prynne. So I'm going to, as soon as I finish here, put this into the chat so that you can have access to it. In addition to being a novelist, Dr. Boyagoda is also professor of English at the University of Toronto, where he also serves as the vice dean. I think that's so appropriate given that he writes about Dante that he's the vice dean. Sorry about that. Undergraduate in the Faculty of Arts and Science. He is a regular contributor to the New York Times, to Commonweal, to America, and the Financial Times of London, and he's the author of 6 books. Dr. Boyagoda comes to us today from Toronto, where he lives with his wife and 4 daughters. So please join me in welcoming him today to Fordham.
Thank you very much, Dr. O'Donnell. Thank you, Dr. Barcella, and likewise to Ms. Maria Terzulli for putting this together. It is a fantastic opportunity and honor to be part of this larger project. The idea of taking this kind of deep, long view of reading Dante together for some 16 years is exactly the kind of wonderful thing that we get to do in a university context as a university community. And I'm really grateful for the chance to kick off this year's Fordham Reads Dante with these remarks. I'm also just very much keen to chat with Dr. Barcella, the resident Dante expert, and then mindful of Dr. O'Donnell in another context as a fellow Catholic writer, as a poet herself, very much deeply engaged with Dante. And your remarks introducing me were all the more generous. So thank you very much for that. And so what I'm going to do with you this early evening here in Toronto and likewise in New York is I'm going to offer just some opening remarks and then some selections from my new novel, Dante's Indiana. And then I look forward very much to the conversation afterwards. So to begin. The Ravenna Festival recently organized a concert to mark the 700th anniversary of Dante Alighieri's death in September 1321. The concert began at his birthplace, Florence, and proceeded as a 4-day hike along a route inspired by his life and work, ending at his tomb in Ravenna itself. The idea of a hike in Dante's honor is brilliant, transporting, and as far as I'm concerned, an outrageous personal affront. 5 years ago, vacuuming potato chips out of the family car on a Saturday morning, while listening to a BBC radio adaptation of the Divine Comedy, I noticed that Dante was breathing hard as he made his way down through the 9 circles of hell. Like many of you, I'd read the poem many times before, but his panting and struggling for breath made sudden, striking sense upon hearing it. For all the metaphysical, philosophical, political, and literary moves and marvels at work in this decisively shaping work of world literature and culture, it is profoundly physical as well from its famous start. Midway in the journey of our life, I came to myself in a dark wood, for the straight way was lost. To find his way, the poem's autobiographical protagonist has to climb down a sinner and demon-crowded inverted mountain amid jagged rocks, broken paths, raging fires, and noxious air. After eventually clambering along Satan's frozen haunches at the pit of hell, Dante ascends to the calm terraces of Mount Purgatory, which are full of grateful, forgiven sinners, before he reaches bright and starry paradise. Here, Dante passes from sphere to harmonious sphere, featuring the joyfully saved, all of them seeing and being seen by God. He's not alone in any of this, of course. The Roman poet Virgil, his literary exemplar and guide, is sent to help him by heaven-dwelling Beatrice, Dante's subject and object of devotion from a young age. She succeeds Virgil partway through purgatory. Helpful pagans can only get so far in the afterlife. And she leads Dante to paradise. Even without a mask, this would be a hard go for anyone. Never mind for a middle-aged poet at his lowest point, despairing and exiled from his beloved Florence in 1302 after ending up on the wrong side of its incessant, often lethal political feuding. And now terrified, consoled, and stirred by who and what he's seeing and meeting on an otherworldly journey. Of course he was breathing hard. Now, as Dr. Barcella and Dr. O'Donnell, and I'm sure many of you know much better than I do, many hundreds of scholars, readers, and writers, including one of Dante's own sons, have written companions and commentaries for the poem, dating almost immediately from its completion shortly after Dante's death in September 1321. Nevertheless, I was certain that I had come up with a completely new angle while listening to that radio dramatization. I'd write a hiker's guide to Dante. But I confess, I am a hustling novelist playing at an academic researcher. After working for a while with some excellent undergraduates here at the University of Toronto on a geospatial mapping of Inferno, I gave up on the hiker's guide to write a novel instead, the second in this kind of larger project that Angela was mentioning earlier. This new novel, Dante's Indiana, is about an evangelical millionaire building a Dante theme park in an opioid-ravaged small town whose lone remaining factory tries to stay open by packaging generic pharmaceuticals for local distribution. Nevertheless, 5 years later, I was full of wrath and envy when I learned about the Ravenna Festival's Dante hike. As far as I'm concerned, they stole this from me, and because of my self-evident Canadian pandemic confinement, I wasn't even able to go there and plead my case in person or pitch the idea for the 750th anniversary. Now, like many of you, I should know better than to complain like this. After all, Dante's poem shows us what happens to people who become trapped in their own selfish thinking and doing. They are doomed for all eternity in brutally fit ways, like the wrongful lovers Dante meets early in his journey, Paolo and Francesca, who spin around each other in a whirlwind without ever touching, having been killed by Francesca's husband, Paolo's brother, after he discovered them touching too much. Or Bertrand de Born, who sowed division between England's King Henry II and his son, and so walks around house separated from his own head, which he carries like a lantern. This punishment is one that many artists, including perhaps most famously Gustave Doré, have visualized as part of their own long-standing tradition of responding to this poem, as have other poets, novelists, memoirists, filmmakers, and even video game designers. Beyond my own researching a hiker's guide and eventually writing a Dante in America novel, I've explored Florence with my wife. I've taught selections from the poem to freshmen every September. I've studied centuries-old illuminations of the poem in rare books libraries at various universities. I brought it with me on visits to creationism theme parks in Kentucky and to the Rust Belt towns of Indiana. Above all else, I've read a canto a day every day for the past 5 years. In other words, it's not 16 years yet, but I've joined generations of other writers and readers across centuries and continents and languages in making Dante part of my life. In so doing, I've come to appreciate that Dante is and isn't supposed to be funny. The Divine Comedy certainly offers humor, a militaristic devil that dispatches his troops elsewhere in Inferno with a reverie blown out of his ass. In Purgatory, and this is actually my favorite character in the poem, Dante meets an old friend, Belacqua, who was famously lazy in life and remains so in the afterlife. He's too lazy to ascend the mountain to paradise. But more than those kinds of moments, the poem offers both darker and lighter inspiration in its pages. It's easy and mutually excusing for us and for Dante to focus only on how he matters to us on our terms today. These days, that can too readily mean either congratulating him if you're a simpatico believer or an angling artist or a proud great books reader, or canceling him for being very far from woke, as with, for instance, his representation of the Prophet Muhammad as split in half for dividing believers with his new religion, a medieval Catholic reading of Islam, or for sending sodomites to hell to be burned relentlessly, or sending them to purgatory, also to burn, but in this case, repentantly. To move beyond treating the poem like a Rorschach test of the relationship between our reading lives and our political lives, I think we have to stop doing what we most naturally do in reading this poem, which is to identify primarily with Dante himself. This is hard. Who doesn't at some point find themselves feeling lost? And we all experience that, yes, but in fact, we are not just sometime Dantes. We are also possible Virgils and hoped for Beatrices. We are always already seekers, but can also be guides, and likewise carers for those in need. And beyond that, we can identify with at least one, if not several, of the hundreds of sinners and saints in the Divine Comedy. We all make bad choices in this life that harm others and ourselves. Dante's epic shows us that what matters most is what happens next. We can refuse to make amends, Inferno. We can seek to make amends, Purgatorio. We can be amended, Paradiso. Understanding ourselves through the fullness of Dante's work can be both humbling and enlarging, a source of relief and a spur to action. Even in our darkest moments, we are not alone. And we should do all that we can to make sure the others in our lives know and feel the same, so that when we look up from our reading of Dante, we're not lost, we're found. Suggest to you now how those thoughts kind of play out in an imagining, a literary imagining. I'm going to now read to you some selections from my new novel. I'm not going to set up the opening because I don't need to for this crowd, but I'll say something after that. From Dante's Indiana. Riding through the valley, I looked up and lost my way. From the ground, my bike beside me, I caught my breath and bent my legs. Nothing cracked or snapped or stung. I pushed up on my elbows. It was midday in Toronto, late November, a Thursday. People pedaled and jogged past. Families fanned out along the path with food bags and strollers and toddlers leashed at the wrist. A few people waved to make sure that I was okay. I waved back. Loose dogs approached, curious, their tails whipping around. Their owners called out treats and punishments, and they turned away from me. I slipped back down. I was alone in the city. I blinked a few times. Beyond the penciled high branches, the heavens looked like the gray white of rainwater in an empty swimming pool. I was alone in the city. The demon was still there. It was beside me. The creature squatted on a plinth wedged between the bike path and the murky river. It had bat wings and a dog face. The Thursday before, it hadn't been here. I was certain of that at least, and had stared at it for far too long. Mid-pedal past. My front wheel went off the path into a slurry of pea gravel. Small stones dug into my skin. Pushing into the earth made them go away. The ground was damp and forgiving. I looked at the gargoyle again. The battered creature must have been dumped out of some lately condoed church. Smashed up bramble and bush ended near its base, rutted lines of dried out mud that led across the path and up to the main road. Tire tracks. Someone had driven it down from the city proper, unloaded it right side up, and left. What was this? A statement? A warning? A joke? Had I taken a wrong turn higher up the path? If they were here with me, we wouldn't lay down and blink and stare. We'd climb and call out and conquer. Molly left in July with the children to stay with her family for the summer. She took their winter clothes. And so at the beginning of this novel, the second novel in this movement, but a standalone novel in its own right, the main character, a bike riding middle-aged Sri Lankan Catholic English professor from a failing Catholic college in downtown Toronto, finds himself variously lost. He's lost his job. He's lost an active sense of his faith, and he's kind of lost his family in a sense for various reasons related to events in the earlier novel. His wife, Molly, has taken their children and moved to Milwaukee, where she's from. And so Prin is kind of stuck, living a kind of repetitive life day after day. And he's struggling because it feels like a punishment. And he's struggling this way. Is this punishment the same thing every day? Or is there some progress? In other words, in our terms, is this punishment in Inferno or punishment in Purgatorio? And then the way that I play this out as the latter is needing money, not really having anything going on in his life, and trying to find a way to get closer to his wife and children. Prynne accepts a rather random invitation that he receives from an evangelical millionaire, as I mentioned in my prepared remarks, who was a Vietnam vet, who spent a significant amount of time in Vietnam. Any of your Commonweal readers, you might have seen in the summer issue an excerpt from the novel on this very theme. This is a kind of an ordinary, God-fearing Christian gentleman who had a kind of infernal experience, a rather brutal one in Vietnam, alongside another friend, a guy from Brooklyn. And this guy from Brooklyn spent his days when they weren't, out in the field, spent his days reading this one little blue book over and over again. It turns out to be Inferno. And then they have some experiences that reveal what this really means to have had this book. And the old man, this young evangelical, realizes that his whole life he thought the only book that could make someone want to live or die was the Bible. And then he's realized that for this other man, it was Dante. And he then devotes himself to Dante while when he returns to the United States, to Terre Haute, Indiana. I'm hoping that this is the one crew that will understand why I set the novel in Terre Haute, high ground, Indiana. But anyway, he returns there and he creates a packaging firm, a small town business that is moderately successful, but then over the course of decades starts to kind of fall apart just as the town falls apart. He retires, giving the factory over to his son, and then he pursues this project to create this Dante theme park. And he's convinced this is the only way that the town can kind of stay alive. There are two abandoned basketball arenas in town. So the new one is going to be Paradiso, and then the old one is going to be Inferno. They're evangelical, so there's no purgatory, but in fact, the idea is that Terre Haute itself is the purgatory. And in the meantime, this businessman's son is trying to do a deal to start packaging and distributing generic opioids in their local town, because it's the only viable business. It's the only one that is guaranteed to keep people employed. But of course, these jobs require them to be distributing the very opioids that are destroying their family members. So if you think about this, even in terms of a Dantean dilemma, there's that happening. And then on the other side, you have Prynne working with a group of people, all of whom are themselves kind of lost in trying to find their way on a theme park, a Dante theme park. What I'm going to read to you from now is a section where Prynne goes to an abandoned theme park outside town for some ideas for how to, he thinks, for some ideas for how to populate this theme park. So I'm going to read to you from this, and then thereafter, a very brief selection where Prynne goes to Florence, and then finally a little taste of what the theme park itself looks like, and then I would very much look forward to a conversation with Drs. Barcella and O'Donnell. And so this now is from the moment where Prynne and two men, Frank and Nick, older kind of light blue collar guys who work for the theme park and are looking for ideas. One of them said, why don't we just go to this theme park outside town for some ideas? So let's see what happens. Are you sure this place is open? I said. There's cars in the parking lot, said Nick. There's people in the parking lot, said Frank. And what's the plan again? I said. The plan is we'll walk through and figure out if there's anything, ideas or even models, at least for the main rides, like those spinning teacups for doomed lovers, right, Prynne? Yes, Paolo and Francesca, forever whirling around each other. See? So yeah, stuff we could use for the park. Then Prynne brings it back to the Dante professors and gets them on board, and either we send it onto the consultants or tender it ourselves. Okay? Okay. Nick and I nodded. Important aside, given that this is an academic audience. So Prynne is brought in because he's not much of a professor and he's not much of a Dante person. And he has to work, this is the challenge, he has to work with a group of unemployed Dante scholars who can get no work anywhere. The only work they can get is being the academic consultants for a Dante theme park. And so they hate this work, and it's the only work they can find as Dante scholars. And they are gumming up the whole project because nothing is good enough, nothing is accurate enough based on their translations, etc. And so Prynne has to kind of mediate between them and then these guys trying to build a theme park. So here we go. There were maybe a dozen vehicles in the gravel parking lot, rusted out family vans and cars with garbage bags blocking the rear windows. At opposite ends were a BMW 323 and a Chrysler 500. Both were black, with tinted windows and fat, mag-hearted wheels. Their engines were on, music was on, and their front windows went up and down for each rag and bone visitor. There were so many of them. It was hard to think that even in this little parking lot in a little town in Indiana, it had undone so many of them. Some were standing still, but most were slouching towards nothing in particular. They were just shuffling around the parking lot, back and forth, between the black cars and their cars and a couple of picnic tables, back and forth between scores and getting enough money to score. We parked away from the other cars and walked to the park entrance. The security guard was sleeping. 3 women approached us. The first had stringy hair. The second had almost no hair. The third had serpentine dreadlocks. All were pockmarked and scratching their chests. The first asked if we had any clean needles. The second asked if any of us was Aaron or when Aaron was coming. The third asked for a ride to work. We kept walking. The women followed for a few steps, then turned back. Others came up and backed away, surprised we were real and here. Dizzy's world was open. Beyond the snack bar, the park was a broad spread of asphalt broken up by rusty kiddie rides, vacant concession stands, and empty game stalls. One summer, I won a Walkman for my daughter, right there. We went to Arby's to celebrate. Megan loved Arby's. Loves. We were right there, said Frank. Does your daughter live in town? I said. Let's keep walking, said Frank. It felt like we were walking through the ghost of an amusement park. We came to the center, a massive plastic and metal elm tree attached to an industrial-sized winch. Above the tree's fudge brown limbs and trunks, peekaboo windows were cut into the metallic greenery. There was a small arched door in the middle of the trunk. The door was closing. The twirling elf tree, said Nick. Yeah, said Frank. I could spend all day in there and it was perfect. I used to think that was what it was like, to be kind of like God, sitting still above it all in one of the windows with everyone looking up trying to find you, knowing you're there and smiling when they see you and you smiling down at them and watching the whole world circling around you. Is there something like that in Dante, Prynne? Said Nick. The door opened. Head first, body part by body part, a young man crawled out, his chin dragging on the ground. Feet first, on her belly, a woman slid out after him. They were skinny enough to fit through the child-size entrance. They looked at us sleepily, then walked away slowly. After a time, 2 little boys also came out of the tree. They followed their parents, the bigger one holding onto the smaller one by his backpack. I really don't think this is the place for us, I said. Just keep walking. It's not the place for any of those kids either, but they're here. People's kids are here, said Frank. He was already walking ahead straight toward the park's main ride. It was a small wooden roller coaster. It was old, but didn't look broken down like everything else. Maybe because it had always been wind-washed and a little rickety. A cut-out wooden knight held a sword sideways beside the entry gate, indicating how tall you had to be to ride the dragon. There wasn't much to it as far as roller coasters go. It had a short, flat run that led into a single steep ascent, which turned into a gradual drop that crested as a long, easy curve that eventually returned you to the start. The ride wouldn't take more than a minute. The front car had a fierce dragon face, and the rest was patterned in electric green scales. The middle cars had arching wingtips, the last one a barbed black tail. Actually, that's perfect, I said. For what? Said Nick. In the middle of Inferno, Dante and Virgil are stuck because they can't go any further on foot. They're surrounded by rivers of blood and deserts of fire. So they take a ride on this human-faced monster. I don't remember its name, but it's kind of like a giant scorpion or snake. So far, all the Dante professors have done to translate that part of the poem is to paint the monster's body between two levels of the ramps, between two of the levels, and have people walk down the ramp. That's so boring, said Nick. I mean, I don't understand 90% of what's going on in Dante. Even after the PowerPoint version you had to put together for us print. But even I can see something scary and fun, and also true to what happens in the story, in a roller coaster that looks like a monster. I mean, this is what we really want for the park, right? Who wants to walk when you can roll, right, Frank? Right, Frank? Yeah, sure, that could work, said Frank. He was texting and looking around, scanning, searching. Frank, you're worse than a middle schooler with that phone, said Nick. Sorry, my wife keeps texting me. Corinne, could you take a few shots for us? I just need to talk to Frank about something. I took his phone and went around the roller coaster, then along the platform taking pictures. Every few I looked back at Frank and Nick, two 60-year-old men in Dockers and hard-toed shoes, arguing. Nick hugged Frank, who didn't hug him back. They agreed. Nick announced they agreed. There was nothing else to see in the park. The passenger side window of Frank's truck was shattered. The glove box was open and papers were strewn on the floor mats. The highway transponder and garage door opener were gone, as was the backrest on the driver's seat and the charger cable and dashboard mount for Frank's phone. The navigation screen was cracked and its metal lining scuffed and dented. Someone had tried to prise it out of the console with the bent, blackened spoon that was sitting on the driver's seat. The tins of Pringles were dumped out and thrown aside. Pringles, all the way down. We looked around. The same cars were there and the same cragged, wandering people. And now a few were now watching us. The Arby's coupons, said Frank. What? They're gone. Look down there. No, I'm serious. Come here and look down there. Look. My Burger King coupons are still there, my Jimmy John's, my Potbellies, my Domino's, but the Arby's coupons are gone, Nick, gone. Frank stepped back and away from the truck. His face was red and lit up and his eyes were big and glassy, like he was about to cry and had just won the lottery and might stab someone. He kept opening and closing his hands, clutching air. He turned to look at the crowd in the parking lot and began running. Megan, Megan, where's Megan? Which one of you knows where Megan is? I'll give you money if you tell me where Megan is. Where's Megan? Megan, who knows Megan? We followed. By the time we reached Frank, he was taking out his wallet. Suddenly, everyone knew Megan. Nick told him to get away and press down on Frank's pocket, hit Frank's hands to make him put his wallet back in his pocket. Most of the people wandered off, mouths agape. Two remained, skinny and scraggly, windbreakers and dirty jeans, sunken face and sad-eyed, fidgety and gumming their raw red faces. She's here, Nick, it makes sense. The Arby's, the Walkman, it makes sense. When I used to drive Megan to the clinic for her methadone, we'd go to Arby's afterwards. That was the treat. And it was working. Damn it, it almost worked. She has to be here, said Frank. One of the men fell into Frank, reaching for his wallet. Nick went to push him away as the other one started patting his own pockets. Looking for what? I saw a silver blade catch light. Knife, I said. Where? Frank, watch out, said Nick. The BMW honked, hard and long, and everyone stopped and looked. The door opened and the music inside stopped, and a very young man stepped out. He might have been 16. The Chrysler 500 drove up beside his car. End this shit, right the fuck now, he said. The first one let go of Frank and the other one put away his spoon, and they ran off a few feet and stopped and turned back and did it again. This is a quiet and peaceful place for quiet and peaceful people. You all are fucking that up. You two motherfuckers standing over there, one more time and you are banned from my parking lot. Understood? But they had already wandered away. As for you, super dads or whatever the fuck, you're going to get fucked up any second now by one of these people, and then the police will come, and that's not happening in my fucking parking lot. That's not happening. It is time to go. It is time to go, and you are never coming back here. It is time to go, and you better go, or my boy in this car beside me is going to make you go. Do you know Megan? And so the effort continues to build this theme park And we learn more and more about the kind of private, very much in Dante, the private motives and failings and longings in forming what outwardly seems to be the story people kind of give Prynne as he's kind of moving through this world. Eventually, Prynne realizes there's much larger games kind of going on, and he steps out for a moment. He's invited to go to Florence to get away from the kind of messy business situation and some of the conflicts between the father and the son, Charlie and Hugh, over the theme park versus the packaging factory. And I thought, given that none of us these days get to be in Florence very much, and I'm sure many of the people in this call have been many a time, I'll read a very brief selection from Prynne's time in Florence, and then I'm going to turn my attention to the final section, and then we'll have our conversation. So remember that while Prynne is dealing with all these other things, he is also not reconciled yet with his wife, Molly. So that's another kind of weight that's on him. He goes to Florence. I spent my first 2 hours in Florence in a lost luggage lineup. Through thick, lipstick-smudged plexiglass, I learned that my suitcase would arrive the following day and be sent directly to the hotel. In the meantime, the airline gave me a care package, a translucent toothbrush, a tiny, beautiful tube of toothpaste, its firm silver and tricolor striped paste resembling a ruddy minnow, unisex deodorant, a pack of chocolate biscuits, and a white undershirt big enough to hoist as a sail. My hotel room wasn't ready, and my phone's travel plan wouldn't be activated for another 3 hours. So I left my book bag behind the front desk, checked a map, grabbed handfuls of biscotti from a bell jar, and walked to Dante's house in cold, bright morning light. It was down a cobblestone side street lined with shops and scooters and scruffy brown men standing around selling leather goods at best price, best price, best price. As soon as one of them caught my eye, he'd shoot to life and ask, what country for best price, brother? Let me guess country for best price, brother. Boss, brother. I agreed to UK, Portugal, Spain, and Goa, and declined each and all the best prices. In the in-flight magazine, I'd read about a prestigious and little-known leather-making school beside one of the city's Dante churches. I'd take Molly there when she arrived the next day. Ahead of me was a narrow, dark house in a dim corner of an alley. Inside, it smelled damp and was all dark wood and heavy stone hallways and steep, narrow steps, which led from floor to floor, exhibit to exhibit. What Dante and his family ate and wore, who they warred with and were healed by. I took notes and pictures. But why would we give part space over to this when we could just move a couple of Charlie's display cases full of his own Dante collection into the lobbies of the theme park and cordon it off? I went through the museum and reached the gift shop, where a young man in a burgundy NYU sweatshirt, sorry Fordham, and the clerks to let him use the bathroom. I picked out a guidebook to Dante's Florence and a couple of accordion-style picture books about the house itself, a packet of illuminated manuscript postcards, and boxes of divine chocolates for the people back home. These were small, sweet saints and sea salt sinners made by a centuries-old chocolatier from Ravenna, where Dante wrote the Divine Comedy in his exile. The little pieces were modeled on figures and symbols from the poem. There was a line of white chocolate roses, and as the box's centerpiece, a white chocolate man gnawing a dark chocolate man's nougat head. The plastic covers weren't properly sealed and the chocolates were covered in a gray film. I also flipped through a children's edition of Inferno. I returned it to the shelf. It was meant for children given wine with their lunch. Back on the street, I saw an alley church made of rough brown brick. I stepped in front of an altar. A guide stood lecturing a sheaf of tow-headed teenagers. I genuflected and sat at the back of the church on a pew the color of dark syrup. I checked my watch. There was still an hour before my phone plan started, 2 hours more before our room would be ready, 22 hours before my luggage arrived, and 20 hours before Molly landed. The church had wispy, rich red paintings of the younger poet adoring and pining for his beloved. To my left was a simple side altar framed by flat fluted columns, underneath which was a gray slab covered in folded notes and dried roses. I went over to read the austere stone plaque pressed into the wall above the slab. The name of the buried person was it? Her name was Beatrice Portinari. Was this really Beatrice? I checked the guidebook. This had indeed been Dante's family church, the place where he'd married Gemma Donati. It was also the Portinari family church. From the 13th century onward, many of them were buried here. including Beatrice and her beloved maid and her devoted maid. It was her. I knelt before her grave, empty-handed. But I didn't need dead flowers and letters. I could leave something living and real instead. I began to pray. I prayed for help, for Molly, for me, for us. But Beatrice wasn't a formally recognized saint. But certainly she died and gone to heaven. She must have. How could she inspire what she inspired and not have gone to heaven? Maybe you'd get a reason or two if you asked Dante's wife. Just in case, I also prayed for the holy soul of Beatrice Portinari, should she still be in purgatory, to be granted admission to paradise. I waited. Someone came into the church through a side door. I looked over. Did the sunlight suddenly seem just a little brighter? Was another soul seeing God face to face and refracting that glory down upon us? Maybe. Either way, once more I prayed for Beatrice and for her intercession, for Molly, for us, for both of us, for us, that on this trip we might turn back to each other, return to our life together, and to both know and want and, yes, love that this is what we were doing together. Not sursum corda, but sursum cordibus, that our lifted hearts might be one. I got up from my knees and backed away from the altar and tomb. Two college girls wearing backpacks and clear braces, their hair in ponytails took my place. They were clutching their phones to roses bought from the brown men at the church door. And then finally, because whenever I talk about this book, people want to know what actually goes into a Dante theme park, I thought I would just read a little bit from the end, from Paradiso. I'm giving you a sense, I think, of Inferno, I'm giving you a sense of Purgatorio. So as the novel plays out, for various reasons, the original plan fails. And Charlie, the businessman behind the theme park, has to make a deal with creationism theme park operators from Kentucky, who are much more adept at running a theme park, but also have certain expectations for their involvement. And they recruit a bunch of people to then serve in the theme park itself by way of their very successful TV show, America's Got Jesus. America's Got Jesus is a very popular Christian testifying talent show. And they run a special edition in Terre Haute, and then they recruit from that performers for Paradise. So this is near the end of the novel. And this is simply, I won't tell you how it's all playing out, but I'll just simply give you a sense of Paradiso itself, the theme park version in this basketball arena. The elevators were set into a wall painted to look like a starry galaxy. Inside one was a smiling young woman in a ruby red velvet gown, one of the Beatrices. Trumpets and French horns filled the air. Glowing constellations and laser lights beamed onto the floors and walls and ceilings. Long stone-framed glass slabs were set up at intervals along the concourse, onto which were projected holographs of saved souls, reciting cantos from Dante and verses from the Bible. At opposite ends of the arena, just above the floor, were choir lofts full of white-gowned singers with combed-out hair. They were practicing a collective duet, call and response, back and forth, human voices in harmony, washing and warping. I passed a carousel playing tinny celestial organ box music, its horses transformed into heavenly creatures, griffins, lions, eagles, rams. Beside it was a kiddie ride, individual spaceships zooming around a track inside a band shell painted as the solar system, held in the massive palms of God. A corner of the arena had a bumper car pen, each car done up as a winged and laughing baby face. The rest of the floor was full of performers going over their routines, dancers, jumpers, dog groomers practicing on cuts of high-piled carpet draped over sawhorses. The arena seats were covered in screens that made 9 rings, shaded beige to yellow to gold to bright white. I met the Dante professor standing in line for the Ferris wheel, which had been painted to look like a shining circle of sunbeams. I joined them. After we were seated, we went up to the massive Imperium rose that had been installed in place of the 4-sided scoreboard. Its glowing folds swayed slowly, blowing warm, scented air beside us. I looked down. How high up before our lives look so fitted? Young men in cropped angel wings, dropping into bungee cord dives and pulling up their body-socked partners. cloud-painted ski lift cars sailing through the middle air, massage chair thrones, their buffed rotating pads catching light, gymnasts in white feathers and brown bodysuits building themselves into a giant eagle and then laughing as they flapped the wings and took flight, leaping and tumbling to the floor. The sound of the choirs, a distant spread of crashing joy. Thank you.
And we're all silent, of course. We're muted, but I'm sure everyone is applauding.
Yes.
Thanks so
We're
much for
applauding.
that fantastic reading, and thank you so much for putting the pieces together and giving us a taste of the various parts of the novel. I've heard some and read, I've heard some of those, and it's great to hear them all put together in this way. So I think Susanna might have a comment or a question or two.
Yeah, well, I have a lot of questions, of course, but maybe I would like to ask a few questions because the important thing, at least to me, is that the Divine Comedy and Dante is still inspiring in some way, and obviously we all respond to reading, this text in different ways, and we use it in different ways, even for meanings or for ends that are not necessarily Dante's own. But this brings me to a reflection, because by reading your book, just the very beginning that you also read, it was truly, I was taken aback at from just by the very first piece. I heard really the rhythm, of the commedia. And I was wondering, is he really, using a sort of rhythmic prose? And is it going to go on for the entire novel, or is just to shock us at the very beginning, just to bring us, throw us with him in the middle of this bike ride with the gargoyles and all this feeling really of getting lost, not knowing, and not really even putting images into focus almost, right? So this is obviously the first question that came up. Also, the other thing is how your, I think, I like very much the fact that you have taken all the serious material, this tragic imagery sometimes. There's a lot of hell here. I don't know if the second week is, and this is something else that I would comment upon just immediately after. But so this was the first impression. It was also how good you were really capturing the subtleties of Dante's humor, because this is really not easy. First of all, in the translation we read, we are deaf. We don't hear them. We don't. That's one of the reasons we are. We initiated it. We need to hear. And even a while ago, we had a reading of Inferno 14, and we had to read it aloud before realizing how much humor there is in that canto, which is usually taken so literally. So this is one of the threats, right? That also Dante really was aware of. Maybe one of the reasons he called those songs rather than chapters, for example. It's because you need to hear them to really fully realize what's going on. So I think you have a very fine ear and hearing, and you really can just give us back that dimension in the prose. So I congratulate
thank you so much.
Yeah, because I think this is something really almost unique. So this is one comment on that. The other thing, and then I cut short because I'm sure there are questions and other things that Angela want to say. The other thing that I appreciated a lot is this ongoing reflection on the relationship between the reader and the author. You as the writer and how a creative writer who you need to get free from all this fasting and chaining by the scholars, right? And these, I mean, that's the scholar's hell, right? And that you only find a job as a consultant for a Dante theme park. It's really, I could feel as a sort of hell, but so that's good. But I could feel also on your side that, you know, we need to talk more. I mean, a scholar, I think, frankly, scholars are still needed because we need to understand what's going on in its own terms in order to really use it then as we like, even in a completely different manner. But we still need to understand what it is in its own terms, right?
Absolutely.
So that's why, for example, I abhor this retranslation thing that
Yeah.
it's apparently now, you know, even on, there was this article on the New York Times just to bring things back close to us, which was, I mean, I was a little bit suffering reading that. You know, held in its many forms. So I think that it's an important point that at least reading from Dante's readers comes to mind. Really, it's, you know, this relationship between the English professor, but, you know, Dante expert reader and the scholars and Charlie, who is the pure creative. He's I mean, he's as crazy as possible, but he's the pure creative here, right? His imagination is unbelievable. I liked it. You know, just right in the middle of nowhere. I mean, what better place?
And I think what's interesting about what you just said was that, you know, he's the regular guy. This is the businessman who creates the idea of this theme park. He has no formal training.
Right.
And, you know, and I think one of the amazing things about Dante is the kind of the profound democracy of the Divine Comedy, right? No one other than Shakespeare can reach that point where we can spend 16 years reading it as a community. We can devote our whole lives to its scholarship, and then you can just read it and live it in a full way. And the fact that, you know, I can think of, other than Shakespeare, I can think of no other writer for whom all three of those categories are possible, right? Do you want me to respond to a couple of your points there? Or Angela, would you like to go to questions from elsewhere? What would you like to do?
Yeah, these were the two major things. I have others, but
Right.
we don't have time. So I leave to Angela.
Yeah, no, please do respond to those comments that Susanna made.
Right. So, I mean, first of all, it means a great deal to hear that from a Dante scholar and somebody who's far closer to the work in such a more profound way, I think, than I am. So that's very humbling, and thank you very much for that. You know, I think, and I'm mindful that Angela is herself also an academic with a creative life. The great temptation is for the one to overwhelm the other. And I'm thinking about what you said about the kind of the rhythm of the opening, which is very intentional. If you were to read earlier iterations, what you would see would be, you know, kind of terrible homages that really felt like parodies, where I was trying as the academic to be so accurate, not even faithful. I think that's maybe the key thing here. I was trying so hard to be accurate to Dante that I was failing to be faithful to Dante, right? Yeah. And it felt very, very stilted. And the shackle that you're describing, you know, the way I would describe it is, I had this moment when I was working on this book where I realized that I'm kind of inhabiting as a writer the Dante comedic universe, rather than, okay, this is the one section of the Commedia that I need to reply to, and okay, now it's Canto this, and which again, a dutiful scholar mindset would do that. And I think I just kind of broke free of that and realized that the situations of the people in this novel naturally invite themselves to a kind of Dantean imagining, right? That when you see the world with Dante, you see it in different ways, so that, and you're all invited. But if you were ever to come to Toronto and go to the Don Valley, which is the kind of the great green lung running through the center of Toronto, there's a lovely bike path. And partway through this lovely bike path beside a nice gurgling brown river is a random assortment of medieval gargoyle statuary, which is part of some kind of contemporary installation art project from a few years ago that seems like it's just kind of sitting there now for good. But you know, there's a demon right there. And for the great majority of people, as they jog or bike past or whatever, well, this is kind of interesting urban life. We're in the heart of a forest in the middle of a city, and there's some cool church-looking gargoyles right there. But when you're seeing it with Dante, right, and you're imagining someone lost, really lost in the middle of the journey of his life, of our life, that's always very important, he sees that in a completely different way. So too, the situation in a place like Terre Haute, right, in terms of opioid addiction and what it can do, what it reveals about the human person. And so I saw with Dante, I imagined with Dante, instead of trying to imagine Dante in America. Do you see what I mean? I was using the vision such as I could. And I also excused myself. That was the other great liberation. I'll stop there. I was so worried and anxious at a certain point, right, about not getting it right, or putting in, you know, I was shoving in characters just to say, see, look, I've read my Dante, and my editor actually pointed this out. He said, people want to read a novel. They don't want to read a paper, right? Where oh, check, he's read his Dante. And so when that moment happened, again, it kind of broke free. And I'm thinking, especially for those that are with us who themselves may have any interest in writing or any kind of creative response to something like Dante, you know, the ability to kind of break free is so liberating if you're fully immersed already, right? It's like being like if Dante's the water and we're fish, imagine a fish being worried about the water. It makes no sense, right? Just swim.
Yeah. It's a good.
And by the way, people should feel free to put questions or comments in the chat if you would like us to pass them on to Randy and have him address them. And that actually partly answers the question that I had. As a writer who is, you know, kind of borrowing from Dante, stealing from Dante, channeling Dante, how much is too much in terms of freedom? Is anything off limits? As you say, you don't want to be schoolmarmy about this and make sure that you check all the boxes. How far do you feel as though you can go? And Susanna mentioned earlier this idea of like wanting to make sure in some way that you're faithful, you know, to Dante. But I'm even wondering, like, do you have to be like that if you're making a new work of art?
Yeah, no, that's a great question.
Yeah.
So I think I had this moment when I was working on the book, maybe at about the 3/4 point, kind of, you know, and somewhere between second and third on my way home. I had this moment where I was, I had a dilemma because the way that the novel was playing out didn't exactly map onto purgatory at a certain point in the terms of the two stories. And it really kind of caught me for a moment because I was anxious, but this is supposed to be the purgatory novel. And it still is in fundamental ways, but I realized that I'm writing my novel. I'm not writing, you know, a Sri Lankan Catholic literary companion to Dante. That's not the project here, right? And when I realized that was the kind of moment where I thought, okay, stop worrying about this. And then the other way that this manifests, again, writers who are listening, anyone who's worked with editors, you will know this. You don't see these things. The editor sees these things on the page, points them out. You curse the editor repeatedly, and then you realize that they're usually right. And my editor, when he read again an earlier version of this, said, you know, you're doing this kind of bow tie thing at the end, where you've got everything together in this big crashing crescendo. And what was interesting was his critique was that doesn't make sense for print, and as far as he could tell, it didn't really make sense for Dante for purgatory, right? Like, why this? But I, as an anxious creative person, was trying to get as much Dante in as possible before it ended and tie it all together, you know. So I think when I gave off those anxieties, when I just forgot them and just wrote the book and was kind of faithful to this story, then I think it still came through. And I think I can't help but have Dante suffusing it everywhere.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I may go, no, Angela, I, I have something to,
Oh, yes, yes, please go ahead, Susanna.
okay. This is a point that really made me, pause while I was reading. It's the conversation with Chad about purgatory. And I was wondering, why is he taking away purgatory? I mean, this is a horrible thing to do. You don't do that because you lose, the whole point of the commedia, that you don't, have the way to bridge and to atone, and then, in some way, be able to again, to open up to salvation. So I was wondering, and then I don't know, maybe I got it completely wrong, but I thought that okay, we're polarizing because the purgatory is the book itself. This is what I thought, that maybe it's a way for the one who reads to look for it in a different way.
Mm.
And I mean, that was my take, and I was wondering whether I was right or not.
I would say that that is a brilliant reading, and I'm deeply satisfied that you sense that, because that absolutely was the idea, was that this is purgatory. Now, for those of you that actually have a physical copy, what you'll see is that in a kind of wonderful way, the book designer created a map of Inferno at the beginning, which is both a kind of theme park map, but then also a kind of, the tradition, as you know, of maps of Inferno, the preface that are included with editions of the Commedia. And then the end is Paradiso. Same idea. And what's in between, but purgatory. So that the object of the book and its reading experience kind of confirms that. But then there's just two other more practical things. Again, for those of you that might be yourselves writers, an evangelical is not going to get behind a purgatory, right? He's not going to get his funders, who are themselves evangelical Christians, interested, but he can get him interested in hell, and he can get him interested in heaven. That makes sense. And then finally, when you're writing a novel, there has to be those kind of moments of just nuts and bolts practicality. A city like Terre Haute, Indiana wouldn't have 3 basketball arenas. Realistically, it might have 2, an old one and a new one, right? So if you take that whole arrangement of things together, it made sense to have only those 2 and then make the town itself purgatory. But the great dilemma or question of the book is Terre Haute Inferno, or is it purgatory? For the people, for Prentice on his own journey, but for the people who are there, what is it for them, right?
Going to be hell.
Yes.
But that's pessimistic, of course. But
I see, Angela, there's a question in the chat. Shall I read it aloud and then respond?
Yes, please do.
From Quinn Fantozzi. I know it was mentioned that your novel was not written to accompany Dante's works and that it is your own work, but do you think it could help deepen people's understandings of Dante and his writings by applying it to our modern day? Was that an intention of yours? Absolutely, it was. I am very happily making a case for the inherent goods of reading Dante, full stop. Like I said, I continue to read it a canto a day, well after finishing this novel. And then beyond that, I think it was something earlier, maybe in response to Angela's question, just that idea of seeing the world around us through Dante it can be an exhilarating and sometimes a troubling thing. Angela had mentioned that I am a university administrator here at Toronto. And last fall, I was basically in an administrative building by myself because of lockdown and virtual learning, etc. And it was one man, a member of the cleaning staff, would go up and down in a route all day long, cleaning the surfaces that only he was touching, because there was no one else in the building, but he was on this track, it was his job. So he would spray down the handrails that only he touched all day long. How can you not see that with Dante, right? How can you not see that more fully because of Dante? So absolutely, I see that as one of the goods. I hope is if in a weird way, I mean, it seems ridiculous, but if my novel helps people get closer to Dante, great.
Yep, absolutely.
I think William Drobik's
handmade to the master, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think William Drobik's question is more to you, Angela, than to me.
The question is, I may be way off here, but reading Flannery O'Connor's works, I found myself a little bit lost despite the writer's vision that I was missing. It took me some time before the elements you are discussing in Dante's Indiana to realize what you just illuminated.
Oh.
So it is a comment about actually your
Right, I saw Flannery and I thought of your recent work, that's all.
Yeah, oh, thank you. But I actually was thinking about, first, you can address that, and I had another Flannery question.
Well, I think all I would say is that this is the, maybe I could respond to it this way, that one of the beauties of, I find, rereading Dante is you discover you know things that you didn't understand at the time. Does that make sense? That you read and then you reread something, you think, you bring something more fully to it. And so to the degree that Catholic writers are invested in a sense of mystery, and mystery is not explicable, that's the whole point, but you can experience it. That's certainly the case in O'Connor. It's certainly something that I perhaps try for in my own way with my fiction, something like Dante's Indiana, but certainly at base, it's someone like Dante, just rereading and discovering what you already know. I always find that a moving experience with Dante every time I go through it. But over to you, Angela.
Yeah, absolutely. That's certainly true about great writers. You know, this is what they do for you. The Flannery question I was thinking of is that, you know, O'Connor also channeled Dante in some of her stories and in her whole sensibility. They both write about the same thing, you know, last things about death and redemption and the judgment. And so just in terms of her whole vision, and then also her sense that, as she says, you know, for my money, there's no writer better than Dante. I actually was charmed by the fact that as you were reading some of your passages, you were laughing at them. And that also reminded me of Flannery, because she often would say, you know, some of my stories, I just can't read them out loud because I just bust out laughing. So she has to choose the ones that aren't so funny. So one of the things I was thinking about is whether or not you are also seduced by your own humor at times as the creator of it. And the other thing was, since there have been so many writers and artists and musicians who have channeled Dante, did you feel as though, I mean, you probably know them already because you're a liberally educated person, but did you feel as though you wanted to kind of review them and think about the ways in which they, like the way somebody like Seamus Heaney uses Dante in Station Island, or, you know, the ways in which O'Connor would use him in order to kind of situate your book among all of these other, you know, works that channel Dante?
Fantastic question, and I think, as we all know, in the kind of eternal order of books, no matter what you think of canons, books are always written in response to other books, right? There's always that sense of a conversation. And I had this moment, I was in Florence. You could probably tell that I was drawing off the personal experience there. Honestly, I talk about the autobiography, but what I was laughing at was remembering I went to Florence with my wife, we went together, and I lost my luggage. And the plexiglass of the lost luggage thing had this giant hot pink lipstick stain on it on our side. And I was thinking, who could be that happy to be in a lost luggage lineup, right? And so as a writer, that kind of goes in the back of your head, and then it comes out, you know, years later to write something. Anyway, I read Beckett's short story about Belacqua. Do you know that one? It's something in the whale. It's a Samuel Beckett early short story that's entirely a modern Irish reimagining of that great character Belacqua from what is it, Canto 4 or 5 of Purgatorio, earlier maybe. Anyway, I remember reading it and then finding myself, Angela, way too worried. And I felt no anxiety of influence from Dante. How could you? But when I saw what Beckett was doing with a character in Dante in a tiny little short story, I became very anxious. And so that told me I should not actually read that writers who were doing the same thing while I was doing it. I loved reading them otherwise. But, you know, the analogy for me in my other life, I also write, you know, often enough about, let's say, South Asia. So when I'm writing about South Asia, I will never read Michael Ondaatje or Salman Rushdie. Like I will stay away, right, from writers who have more fully already inhabited the place where I'm trying to go as a writer. So I would say, I made a decision not to read Heaney in this context because it would have just been way too practical feeling. But now I suspect I will.
Yeah, great. Makes a lot of sense. Susanna, did you have another question or comment that you wanted to make?
I think would like to hear from our, from the audience. Somebody may have some other questions. Always.
Yeah, and it can just be about Dante. It doesn't have to have anything to do with me or the novel.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, this is true. I mean, the fact is, this is, we're all in the service of trying to clarify and make Dante more available to us, right? More available to us as modern readers and contemporary people. And certainly your novel does that, as does the scholarship, that people like Susanna do, and other art forms that are out there. And as I didn't mention this actually in my introduction, but it is the 700th anniversary of Dante's death and on the 700th anniversary of the Commedia. So all over the world, for those of you in the audience who may not be aware of this, there is a huge Dante party going on all over the world in terms of ways of celebrating Dante's work. I just read the other day, I think maybe Susanna, you shared this, that there's a marathon reading that's going to be taking place in Florence. And there are going to be famous actors and actresses like Ralph Fiennes is involved, any number of people. I think they're viewing the Hollander translation. So it's, all you have to do is look for stuff, and it's out there, for you to really enjoy and take advantage of this opportunity to, live with Dante every day, or just one 24-hour period and just do the whole thing. I think we have another question in the chat. It says, as a kind of New York equivalent of the Dante theme park, do you think the New York City Planetarium could mount a show based on the Paradiso?
That'd be great.
That's a great idea, I think.
And actually, you know what? Like in some ways, Ernest's question answers Quinn's question. In other words, what Ernest might be imagining was because of, in some ways, my proposing a Dante theme park, right? It kind of invites you to kind of look around the world and see things in very different ways and see possibility. And then when you see the possibility, then you always realize Dante got there first. And it's kind of joyful to realize that there's enough in Dante to perfectly justify a planetarium show, based on selections from Paradiso. So yeah, I think so. And I would just say, I appreciate we're getting kind of close to the hour here, and I still have to go. I have to vote. It's Canada's federal election. It doesn't take 16 years for one of our elections like you guys. It just it's 3 weeks and we're done. And tonight's election night, so I've got to go home and vote in a moment. But anyway, what I was going to say was that in a lot of ways, what I'm also hopeful with this book is I think Dante is too easily reduced to Inferno in the public imagination. It's easy, it's a shorthand, it's funny, everyone gets it right away. But there is so much more. There's 66% more by way of, Purgatorio and Paradiso. And I think the more that serious Dante people, like everyone involved in this event, can kind of make the case, yes, Inferno, but, the total story, which also means Purgatorio and Paradiso, I think the more we do for Dante and for each other.
And it also, if I may add, as you read more into the Commedia, you also look back always. No, it's never be linear. So as you progress, you look back because you reread mentally what you just left behind, and you see it in a different light. So it's always,
Beautifully put, yes.
With you, it's never finished.
Exactly.
No. So that's also, it's good that one reads also the Purgatory and the Paradise, because it's only at the end of the book that you fully understand the Inferno as well. So see it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like just reading Inferno is like reading the first third of a novel and not reading the rest. As the great, I'm trying to remember which new critic among the new critics said this, The ending confers meaning on the whole. You don't have any idea what it means until you get to the ending, and that confers the meaning on the rest
Yeah.
of it. So,
Exactly.
yeah, so and you just miss a lot of the pleasure as well as the meaning. So it just deepens so much as we go through, as we get higher and higher, our understanding gets deeper and deeper. It's so paradoxical. So unfortunately, we are at the end of our time. I think we have addressed the questions that we had. We're very grateful for you joining us, Randy, and giving us a taste of your book. Please
My
do
pleasure.
check out the link in the chat, and feel free to go ahead and purchase a copy of the book. I'm sure that you'll enjoy it. And there's also an excerpt in the most recent Commonweal, and you can
That's
read
right.
it there as well and get a sense of it. It says, this is the link to Dante Today, crowdsourced repository for sightings of Dante. Is the link.
Awesome.
Oh, okay, great. Excellent. Thank you.
Great.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I'm sorry, Susanna.
Oh no, I was thanking Alessia, the person who just posted is Alessia.
Oh, great. Thank you so much.
And can I just say, Angela, thank you so much for this invitation. So generous of you, to Maria for organizing it. Susanna, I could have listened to you talk about Dante, not just about my own writing in Dante.
Let's continue the conversation.
I would love to. I'd love to. I hope to see you all in person.
I'd love to, really.
Yes.
So let's make plans, as usual. Even for the trekking, you never know, or the theme park.
and let us know as soon as you finish that third novel. We're waiting.
I'll be back. Don't worry.
Because we've got 16 years,
I will finish it. I will finish it within 16 years, I promise.
Wonderful.
Okay, the date. Thank you so much.
Okay, so thanks all, and thanks everyone for coming. We'll see you at the next Dante, Fordham Reads Dante event. Write to cax@fordham.edu and you will find out when it is. So ciao, everybody. Have a great evening.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye-bye. Have a good
Bye-bye. Be
evening,
well.
everybody. Ciao.